Baby, baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the NotoriousSA podcast. It is your boy NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. I've been okay. It's been a while since I've been off. I've been just kind of dealing with my own life and all the things that come with that. So, I've been okay. I know it's been a while, but I want to talk about something that's been what I think should be the top story on the news almost every night, and at least in my mind the most important story that's happening is today is June 7th, so yesterday was the 6th, and yesterday was 5 months to the day that a violent insurrectionist mob stormed the U.S. Capitol attempting to stop the certification of President Joe Biden's electoral victory. Folks, I know you probably don't want to necessarily relive this over and over again, and maybe you're tired of hearing about what happened, but to me it's critically important that we discuss in as much as possible exactly how bad January 6th is for democracy, for the American Republic, for law enforcement, for trust in the system, the constitutional system, and for the ever-growing problem that Donald Trump still presents to us as Republicans and American citizens. Mind you that, as of right now, there are investigations ongoing, but here are some of the facts and statistics about where we currently are in the investigation of the January 6th insurrection. So, in terms of what we know about damage, in terms of total cost to the U.S. Capitol itself has been estimated to be about $1.5 million. And this includes, smashing windows and doors and desks and pounding and cleanup and everything else that the insurrectionists did in the Capitol to defile it and try to ruin it for everybody. And that's just the material cost of the building. There's been 5 deaths as a result of the violence, or 5 deaths after or participating in relation to the violence, 140 injured police officers, and as of right now, today, January 7th, more than 460 arrests, with another 200-300 possibly still in the works. Along with, as I've noted today from Amanda Carpenter in The Bulwark, a growing conspiracy charge against a group called the Oath Keepers, which had members there in the building acting in a coordinated fashion to try to stop the certification of Joe Biden's election. We've heard from the Justice Department and other people that this is not only the most complex case in Justice Department history, it's also the largest case in Justice Department history. It's the largest system that the Capitol Police have had to deal with in terms of their overall arrest yearly as opposed to just from that day. And we have people, my fellow Republicans, in positions of power who, while at the time acknowledged what had happened, have since slowly walked back January 6th. And it goes from being an insurrection, being an organized, planned attempt by certain groups to disrupt the certification of the Electoral College vote, egged on by, at the time, the President of the United States, Donald Trump. There's just the greatest amount of hypocrisy you can imagine. And I want to put this into context for you here. So, as someone who tries to get as much political media from as many different sources as I can, there is a difference in the way that liberal sources, mainstream sources, and conservative sources have all covered this story. And I will say that the mainstream and the liberal sources tend to be a bit more accurate, just because, again, the amount of documentary evidence that is publicly available to us now and has also been provided by the Justice Department and law enforcement agencies is overwhelming. There is an overwhelming amount of public information from people who were at the Capitol on January 6th, who publicly posted about being there, about stopping the steal, about how it was a rigged election, and then bragged on social media about breaking through the Capitol doors and attacking police officers and wanting to kill or hurt members of Congress and their staff. Mind you, the same people who, in total obliviousness to the irony of it all, were wearing Back the Blue and Stop Immigration and Build the Wall shirts. It's really hard to put into words how frustrating and maddening it is to see people wear these clothes, talk about these values as if they actually ever really believe them, and then completely abandon them on the basis of lies and put themselves in a position where they're facing serious federal criminal charges. Personally, I love hearing stories of people arrested for participating in the insurrection because I have no sympathy for anybody who crossed that barricade that day. I have none. Because these same people demand that we build a wall, that the laws and police and boundaries and borders be respected, lest our very sovereignty as a nation be questioned, only to ignore everything they've ever said and burst through a barricade to try to stop an inevitable certification of a presidential election that their candidate lost. And I know there's a lot of people out there who will say that it was bad, that they shouldn't have been there, that it was a bunch of knuckleheads. But Steve, this wasn't a terrorist attack. This wasn't, 9/11 or the Civil War, as Joe Biden and the liberal media want to tell you. Sure, it was a couple of people walking around being jerks, or tourists, as some members of Congress who were pictured being afraid said later. The fact of the matter is, the FBI does in fact categorize it as domestic terrorism. And from everybody from Ben Shapiro to Eric Erickson to Dan Proft and to all the other conservative media figures who know that January 6th is the worst thing that could have possibly happened if Donald Trump ever wanted to come back into power, and they know that it can be used and abused against them repeatedly, and therefore they have to do everything in their power now, when it's still relatively fresh, to muddy the waters, to create false equivalencies, and to demand that we move on from what happened, because we know if we keep talking about it, people are going to keep getting mad. And if they keep getting mad, they're going to take it out on the people who they think are responsible. And the people who are responsible are in the same positions of power, and they do not want to be held accountable for their own actions. I want to tell you guys a quick story here about January 6th. What was I doing January 6th? I was home. And as somebody who is a nerd and interested in the electoral process, I was watching what was happening live on television as we were attempting to go through the Kabuki theater that was the electoral certification process. Mind you, what happened, what was supposed to happen on January 6th is, as many people described before this, a formality. The Electoral College had already certified the votes after counts and recounts and audits from actual auditors who know what they're doing. And after every agency, including every judge and Trump's own people, said that this was free of the kind of widespread fraud that Trump claimed, he still continued to press the idea that the election was stolen. To this day, to last Saturday, June 5th, when the former president spoke in North Carolina and still made the claim that it was stolen from him and it is the crime of the century, and is attempting to cast his big lie that the election is stolen into they are the ones who are lying. Because that's what Donald Trump does. He projects his own problems out into the world and uses that to his advantage. Donald Trump tried to steal an election. Donald Trump misled millions of people who apparently actually believed that there was fraud, that it could change, and that if January 6th was the last day, that this was the day that they had to make a stand for my country and my freedom and, of course, my president. So I watched on TV as I saw these disingenuous objections being raised, and I figured we were going to be here a while, only to later see that a mob had broken through the barricades and had started attacking police officers. They attempted to break through into different areas. They attempted to break into the House chambers. That resulted in a person being shot and killed. Rightfully so, I should say. The Senate chamber was breached. We saw the shaman walking around along with other people. And you can criticize the Capitol Police for not being prepared, for not being able to handle it respectively. You know what? I'm sure there's issues in there, and that should always be looked at. What I don't think anybody figured was that there was an organized attempt by people who, quote-unquote, back the blue to overthrow an election and attack police officers in the process. I think it does help break the stereotype that these people were supportive of law enforcement from the beginning, because they weren't. They were supportive of one thing: Donald Trump. And when he became president, that meant that his word was law, that he was the arbiter of truth, and that his declarations were the only that mattered. And that became so widespread as become party doctrine at this point. People like me in the minority of the GOP who saw this coming in 2015 and were right the whole time, we continue to be attacked by people in the party as people who won't move on or give in to the left or just want to be Democrats. As if a violent insurrection launched by the losing presidential candidate is somehow something that we can just ignore and pretend like it never happened. Or in some cases just totally minimize it. The same people who throughout all of 2020 were talking about the riots after the murder of George Floyd, and the stealing and the looting and the shooting, about the collapse of law and order in the streets. And yet, when the Capitol itself is invaded by a group of lawless insurrectionists, these same people say, why don't we investigate what happened last year? That was the bigger issue than, 100 people wandering around the halls of Congress. So, of course, they're doing what CNN did last year by trying to downplay the violence that had occurred as a result of people protesting. It's not inconsistent to say that both the liberal media attempted to downplay the violence that was happening in the riots of 2020 while trying to explicitly stress that it was supposed to be peaceful, while at the same time the conservative media complex takes that exact formula and puts it on January 6th, saying that the vast majority of people were peaceful protesters. And while some bad apples got into the Capitol and wandered around and caused trouble, a lot of people were just in there. They thought it was a tour. The police let them in. They were allowed to go in. So this isn't really the issue. The bigger issue is everybody else that's involved. And doing this has only one explicit purpose. It's because they know what happened is wrong. They know it can be used against them. They know that there's people that they know and respect and care about who either passively let it happen, actively encouraged it, or in fact were in the Capitol or near the Capitol when it was attacked. Is it the same thing as a plane flying into the building? No, but it's a mob of people who believe that the sitting president of the United States told them to go there and disrupt what they believe is an illegitimate election, despite no evidence to the contrary. And to be clear, if Donald Trump had just said, "I lost," we could transition. You could do all the stuff you wanted about how it was unfair how the media treated him, how the Democrats changed the laws to benefit them, not illegally, and it didn't really benefit them, but that's the argument that they'll make. And of course, that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because the election had too many irregularities to be sure, and these people's frustration and their voices were ignored, and therefore they had to act out. Which is literally what people say when riots take place and looting happens, and we do not let that off with a pass. But for some reason, the capital of the United States, which, passes trillion-dollar budgets and funds everything in the country, somehow that isn't worth denying, but burning down a Wendy's or a Foot Locker is worth a congressional investigation? As if there's clearly not a difference between what is local law enforcement's responsibility and what is the responsibility of the Capitol Police and the Justice Department and the FBI. It's literally a building that Congress is in. It's their building. It is the people's house. But there are people who work there, people who are represented to go there. It has its own offices. It has its staff. It's its own little world, in a sense. And I've been there. I've done the appropriate thing to talk to my legislatures. I've made appointments. I've gone through security checks. I've walked through the halls and lobbied. And you know what? The Capitol Police, I've seen them deal with a couple of people who are less than cooperative in their protest. But they're good people who do that all the time. And the idea that the sitting president of the United States would launch his followers against them and then tell the cops that they're the traitors, that they are the ones betraying their oath of office while these people attack them with weapons, with bear spray and poles and shields and whatever other weapons they could find. And people are going to sit there and try to tell me that that's not reflective of Trump. That's not reflective of him. He didn't want this. He said to protest peacefully and patriotically, and he told them to stop. Now, when it comes to Trump's role in this, I mean, we can litigate this all day if we want to. There was an impeachment trial that happened, the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump, which happened after he was out of office, mostly due to the fact that, again, the Republican Party realized that even after an insurrection, they still weren't able to break free of him. So their next choice was to try to minimize what happened. And they said the president isn't in office, it's a technicality, he didn't cause the riot, he said the words peacefully and patriotically, and of course, look at all the violence the Democrats let go last year. As if being the consistent person and saying what they did was wrong and what Trump did is also wrong, if not worse, because it involved an assault on the power transfer that we've taken peacefully up until now. People have asked me who are more conservative leaning, who are definitely... It's not that most people who I've talked to about this deny what happened on January 6th, but they definitely try to undersell the effects of having the Capitol be raided by an insurrectionist mob. Particularly that the then president is not responsible for these actions. Even though he's the one who pushed the Stop the Steal narrative, he's the one who refused to concede, and everybody else just went along. All of his lackeys and toadies and the talk radio, Chicago's Morning Answer, AM 560, 890, everybody began to push off the possibility of Trump losing. So they kept talking about the legal challenges. They kept talking about statistical anomalies. They kept talking about all of these issues that were, in the end of the day, bullshit. Just nonsense. Just noise made by angry people who were convinced that Trump would win again. And when he didn't, the only thing that they could think of was not that more people actually voted against him, but that it was stolen. So when they talk about the 74 million Trump voters as if they're all a unique block of people who agreed the exact same way, and the 81 million people who voted for Biden aren't real, because who knows how many of those were fake ballots in their minds. Even though the only voter evidence we have of fraud is people voting for Trump people who committed fraud to vote for Trump, including someone who voted after he murdered his wife. But again, are we pushing these election laws in the places where it matters? No, it's happening in states that Joe Biden won, that have a Republican-controlled legislature, who understand that they need to act to appease these people, because as long as Donald Trump is still free and breathing and his crowd still continues to control the narrative of the GOP, they're going to be stuck like this. But I want to tell you, even though a majority of senators voted to convict Trump, it wasn't enough to reach the conviction status required by the Constitution, which was 2/3. But I want to tell you right now, you're going to hear all this talk about how President Trump did not endorse violence and definitely did not want violence to happen. Let me tell you something. It's false. Because he said it in his January 6th speech at the Stop the Steal rally. He confessed that he wanted his supporters to break the rules because in his mind, the other side had already broken the rules. And I have the receipts. During President Trump's speech, at about 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 49 seconds in, and I've captured this, I've highlighted it, and I've shared it, and I've screenshotted it, and I've shared it to the world, because in my mind, it's the truth. President Trump confessed to provoking violence in his own way. And what do I mean by that? I'm just going to read from the source. Again, from the aforementioned quote earlier. They want to play so straight. They want to play so, sir, yes, well, the United States, the Constitution doesn't allow me to send them back to the States. Well, I say, yes, it does, because the Constitution says you have to protect our country, and you have to protect our Constitution, and you can't vote on fraud. And fraud breaks up everything, doesn't it? When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. What are we to take away from that? What are we to take away when you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules, and that fraud breaks up everything, and you can't vote on fraud? What does he mean by that? What do you think he means by that? For those who are lax in trying to defend him, including some congressional candidates on Twitter, they try to tell me that I took that out of context because it was about whether or not the vice president could refuse the results of the Electoral College, which wasn't a question that any real person was asking, because the real people know that's not how the process works. You can't do that. And the idea that Donald Trump tried to pitch that and said that because the other side committed fraud, we no longer have to follow any rules because they broke the rules, therefore we can break the rules. And the crux of this is that they didn't actually break the rules, they're just saying they broke the rules to get people mad, so therefore they feel justified when they can attempt to break the rules. It can't get much clearer than that. It can't possibly get much clearer when he says when you catch someone in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules. In former President Trump's mind, that means the other side cheated, therefore we can break the rules because I have to protect the Constitution and our country. Which of course is that initial projection earlier of him trying to break the rules and defy the will of the people, but by telling everybody else that he's the one doing it, he convinces a large sector of America that he is the sole arbiter of truth and justice, and that the other side stole it from him. Look, I'm going to say it. I voted for Joe Biden. I've been pretty clear about that. I thought he was a better choice. And you know what? Up until January 5th, it was a different story. Trump was bad at his job. I didn't agree with it, and the majority of voters didn't agree with it. And a large number of Republicans, in fact, maybe not a lot in the sense that some of you think, but enough to vote for Joe Biden into office in critical states, mattered. And when I tried to tell my colleagues about this, many of them were convinced that no, that this is impossible, that Trump couldn't have lost unless there was cheating. And as somebody who worked on election day, who worked the polls, who did what thousands of other volunteers did across the entire country, that's an insult to me. That's an insult to me and everybody else who followed the rules and worked hard, because a lot of people who don't understand anything about how elections work heard Donald Trump say it was fraud and took that and ran with it despite all contrary evidence. And again, it was pushed by people like Steven Crowder, by people like Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin and Rush Limbaugh and everybody else who knew their audience could not handle the truth and decided to give credence to every crazy legal, statistical argument nonsense. That the idea that it could be overturned, or that there's enough fraud to put into question, or that the president could apparently be reinstated somehow, despite no mechanism for that process existing. This is what happens when you tell people there's no such thing as a wrong opinion. This is what happens when people cater to the worst aspects of an audience's desires and needs. Because by the time they need to make a correction, by the time the truth comes out, it's already too late. You've convinced too many people that it was fraud. You've told the wrong story for so long that many people don't know what to think. So much so that some of them decided to apparently ruin their lives and break into the Capitol building facing federal time. By the way, anything that I'm citing and talking about is going to be in the show notes here. So one of them is going to be Amanda Carpenter's article that came out today. There'll also be links to the official website on the FBI Capitol Insurrection page, along with links to other accounts that are trying to find this. But there is one other thing I wanted to talk about in regards to this. And that's the idea that some people in the conservative media have taken now to not deny that it happened, but to say that this was just kind of a spontaneous, people, got all worked up and ran into a building they weren't supposed to be into, and we shouldn't take it too seriously. Let me tell you something. This was planned. Donald Trump himself may not have planned the insurrection, but his followers did, and his followers believed his words. And when he says things like fraud allows us to change the construct of how we can fight this election, it means that these people who were looking for a fight and cosplay as fake soldiers and revolutionaries decided that this was their moment. And it was planned in public. While the intelligence that the FBI had and the Capitol Police had, and of course what exactly happened from the White House that delayed the response is still up for debate, but it seems pretty clear Trump didn't care that his followers were trashing the Capitol. In fact, he was thrilled by it. He was thrilled that his people were so mad that they are willing to attack the Capitol building of Congress. What the founders thought of our equal branches was the most equal and most important. That man and his cronies and his devoted followers all worked in concert to sow doubt about the election, to lie about its results, to get people worked up, to the point where they decided that they had to storm the Capitol building because they thought it was the only way that they could keep their president in power. That is some third world nonsense that is happening in America. And the same president is still out there and still commands the respect of our party, which, by the way, is smaller than it was in 2015, has less power, and is less popularly favorable. And instead of just realizing this, instead of just making the simple deductive reasoning that most people do not like Trump, people in our party have gone out of their way to bend over backwards to try to keep the MAGA movement alive, despite MAGA and Trump being forever branded as part of the largest documented crime in history. The insurrection of the Capitol has Trump's name all over it. Is that the legacy you want? That's the legacy you want to share? That's the MAGA America First movement? A group of violent insurrectionists who I have no mercy for? By the way, in case you didn't get the title, No Mercy for Insurrection. I will say, as someone who has grown up with law enforcement as family and friends, has also seen when law enforcement is messed up, I know that the criminal justice system has been unfair to a lot of people, and it's full of people who make mistakes, and unfortunately those mistakes can have long-term repercussions. And normally, I'm an advocate of, we don't need as many people in prisons, and we don't need as many people to be arrested as we do for, drug crimes and things of that nature. But in this case, I have no sympathy for anybody who's been criminally charged. And I just want to do the legal note here. Obviously, anybody who's been arrested is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, or if they plead guilty, or they're convicted by a jury of their peers, or a judge if they decide to go that route. All of that's still technically true. But because so many of these people publicly documented their crimes and put them out, and they were captured on Parler and Twitter and Facebook and by news cameras and TV cameras and streaming services everywhere, if you were in the building that day and you were publicly visible, odds are somebody has seen you. Somebody who knows you has seen you. And based on the amount of tips that the FBI has sent and received, there are lots of people who, and I will say again, if you are not part of the insurrectionist crowd and you were incorrectly identified as being one, that's wrong. We should not go after people who did not, in fact, break through the Capitol barriers and participate in the insurrection. And I want to be clear. To me, it's pretty simple. There was a barrier, and if you were peacefully protesting listening to Trump's speech, you were fine. And if you crossed the barrier and went to the Capitol, you were now part of the insurrection. This isn't a person wandered over and didn't know where they were. You wouldn't use that excuse if somebody wandered over the border and was like, oh, I didn't know. I thought I could walk in. Of course they wouldn't. Because when it comes to people of different skin colors, these same people will completely have no mercy. They have no mercy for George Floyd. They have no mercy for anybody else who was unfairly accosted by the police. These same people, they talk about the Capitol police officer who shot insurrectionist Ashley Babbitt and demand to know who that person is and why there is an investigation into an unarmed veteran being shot. Which, by the way, the fact that she was a veteran has even less sympathy for me, because that means she knows that deadly force is a real thing that she could have encountered, and she chose to try to break through anyway. Knowing that there were guns pointed, knowing that their lives were at stake, she chose to participate in an insurrection against the government and attempted to break through a barrier to which she was not allowed to go. And deadly force was used in the most justifiable textbook example ever. And anybody who claims to back the blue and want the police to get credit when credit is due, this same crowd of people who think that Derek Chauvin got a bad rap in his trial, which he didn't. He murdered George Floyd and is a bad police officer. That guy should be excused, but the police officer who shot Ashley Babbitt, that is a question that we need to resolve. Knowing full well that the attempt is to out this person and have them be harassed by MAGA supporters and people who think Ashley Babbitt was the victim, which she was not. She was the terrorist. She was the aggressor. She had it coming. I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad about saying that at all. I understand that somebody died, and that's sad, but that person died trying to take away my vote and my government and my constitutional order. So the fact that that person had to die to save America, I'm willing to live with that. I'm willing to cheer that fact from the rooftops. I hate to say that I'm glad she's dead, because I don't think I'm glad anybody's dead, but I'm glad an insurrectionist who attempted to hurt people got what was coming to her. And when I hear reports about how people are being treated in the correctional facilities, being detained, they're insurrectionists. Yeah, they're people, and I hope their basic legal rights are protected, but they deserve no sympathy. They deserve no creature comforts. They wanted to cosplay as revolutionaries and act like they could just overthrow the country. You know, if that happened in China or another place, there wouldn't be criminal trials. There wouldn't even be public people trying to defend them. They would have disappeared forever and be dead and buried somewhere. In America, we still have the rule of law. So despite the huge amount of cases that are here, we still have rules. And you know what? These people will face criminal charges. They can have their day in court. Or as it looks, because the evidence against them is completely overwhelming and they could be staring at an unsympathetic jury and an unsympathetic judge, they're going to plead guilty and do whatever they can to avoid the worst sentences. And there are some people who think they did nothing wrong, and I'm sure they'll want to go down and be considered martyrs and political prisoners, as American greatness calls them. But they're not. They're not political prisoners. They're insurrectionists. They are people who participated in an attempt to overthrow the peaceful transfer of power in America. That has never happened. These same people want to talk about the Civil War and when other terrorists held different parts of Washington hostage in the past, as if that's real terrorism. What happened on January 6th doesn't count. The fact that you're putting them in the same category means they are. And the fact that it was so publicly documented and visible that you have to be a bald-faced liar to say what happened didn't happen means that there should be no sympathy for insurrectionist defenders. There should be no sympathy for people who participated in it, who accompanied these people. These people brought weapons. Somebody brought homemade napalm. Homemade napalm to the Capitol. Somebody put 2 active pipe bombs outside of the political party headquarters of the DNC and RNC. That person is still at large. That person left bombs that could have killed people. And yet, what do I hear when I listen to Ben Shapiro or Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on Chicago's Morning Answer? What do I hear from Eric Erickson and all the other people who I thought might have some form of decency? Was that January 6th is just being over-politicized. It's just over-politicized. We know what happened. The Democrats are just going to abuse it anyway, so Republicans shouldn't cooperate. You know what? That's a very short-term strategy, because we already have almost all the documentary evidence that's available, and there's still more. The Capitol Police have far more video surveillance than they are allowed to show at the moment. They have so much documentation of people believing lies, sharing lies, spreading lies, and believing that they were justified in storming the Capitol building because they wanted to overthrow democracy. I don't give a fuck what they thought is true. It's not. If all those people thought they could fly and jumped off a cliff and they all fell, it wouldn't be like maybe they could fly and something happened. No, they couldn't fly, they could never fly, and the fact that anybody believed it and decided to go through with trying to jump is worthy of ridicule, in my opinion. I feel no different to the insurrectionists. I feel no different to these people who, in my mind, I barely consider people. They're animals. Look at them. Go through the case files. See these people who for years were just assholes, liars, grifters, spreading nonsense, believing nonsense, and then deciding that to use that nonsense, I'm going to break into the Capitol of the United States of America and threaten people because Donald Trump said I could. These people in prison still believe Donald Trump is going to save them. They believe he's coming to help them. You know, one would think that after a violent insurrection of the government, that we would just be done with this dude, and we would let him fade into the obscurity that he so much deserves and or pending criminal charges. But no. Too many people in my political party still believe that Donald Trump is the real president, or that it was stolen. And frankly, being in the minority makes it very hard for me to control any of the narrative, even here in Illinois, where Trump's strength isn't even that great. But there are plenty of people who believe that that model somehow will work for them. Which, by the way, good luck to my fellow Illinois Republicans. The map has been rigged. They have the money. They have the power. And as long as a bunch of you keep propping Trump up as what you believe the world should be like, we will never be taken seriously again. Ever. And even so, their Democrats in this state are using the Republicans in other states to justify their own gerrymandering. They're using it to justify the suppression of Republicans in our state. And as much as I'd love to sit there with my fellow Republicans and talk about how nothing's really changed with Madigan being gone, these same people will then defend Donald Trump and the insurrection, as if those two things don't seem to connect. As if there isn't all the documentary evidence in the world of social networks and people saying, I want to be part of the insurrection. I want to smash shit. I want to get angry. I want to pretend that I'm a soldier and I'm fighting Antifa. I'm a proud boy. I'm a 3%er. What you're basically saying is, I don't know how American history works. What you're saying is that I believe being a thug is more important than understanding how the process works. And for a lot of people, it was just as simple as, Trump's the president, I support him. No matter what. Hell, high water, facts, my own personal safety and freedom doesn't matter. Because Donald Trump said it was stolen, therefore, that's the only thing that matters. You know what else matters? The rule of law. The Constitution. Our brave men and women of law enforcement who fought off an angry, violent mob led by the former president. Look, I'm going to be very clear about this in the future. If anybody in the Republican Party wants to work with me in the future, I'm not going to put up with any shenanigans about the insurrection. I'm not going to put up with any bullshit about it being fake. I'm not going to talk about these people like they don't deserve what happened to them. And I'm not going to say that Donald Trump isn't responsible for it, because he is. Because he's the one person who could have ended all of it by just accepting reality, but he didn't. And he dragged the GOP and America into the pits of despair because he couldn't accept the fact that he lost. And there's too many people in the party who refuse to say that. There are too many people that I've been with, that I've hung out with, that we've talked about, who a couple of years ago told me Liz Cheney was a conservative they would vote for in the future, only to tell me she's now the traitor because she told the truth about Trump. You know, maybe it's these people are so afraid of the Democrats and the left that the only thing that they could think to do is just defend Trump as a reflex. The same people who talk about truth being important only believe in Trump. They only believe in him and what he has to say. And I'm sure whenever that criminal indictment comes down for him, when it's pretty clear he engaged in a crime that they'll have absolute concrete evidence of, you'll have the same people denying it. Ideally, at that point, enough opportunists and smart people will figure out what it is, and I'm sure they'll just run away from it and pretend it was never there. But we can't ignore it. You can't ignore the most documented crime in history. You can't ignore the first time in history that we had a peaceful peaceful transfer of power interrupted by the sitting president and his minions, and the people still in Congress who, despite being attacked by these people, still voted to decertify the election and still talk about it like it never happened or it's been overblown. Because they're either afraid of these people, because they need these people to stay in power, or a combination of both. I have to trust that Joe Biden and the Department of Justice will do the right thing and prosecute all of these people to the full extent of the law. I have to hope that there will be so many TV ads of police officers being attacked by people in Trump gear that just convinces everybody that any Republican who doesn't immediately stand up and condemn it is in fact implicitly or explicitly endorsing what happened. And they deserve it. If you couldn't vote to impeach Trump when he clearly decided to overthrow the government, especially when you thought the first impeachment was an attempt to overturn an election, if you still think that Donald Trump should be or is a politically viable option that doesn't require the worst case constitutional scenario that they're apparently planning for him to be in power again, because now they're not trying to keep the Republicans who told Trump he was wrong. They're trying to replace them with people who will do what the crowd and him want, which is to break the law, break the will of the people. And it doesn't matter if Arizona or Wisconsin voted for Biden. They want the state assembly to appoint a slate of electors to vote for Trump, because that's all that matters. Because in their minds, America is on the brink of collapse. And the only person, for whatever reason, they trust is Donald Trump. And there's too many people in the Republican Party who either loudly profess to it or quietly let it go. And I'm sick of it. I'm sick of people, months after the fact, trying to make this not the issue that it is. Because it is. These people need to face the consequences of their actions. And you know what? Clearly Donald Trump didn't face the consequences. Sure, he had a trial, but they weren't able to reach the conviction required to permanently remove him from office again. Sure, many of the syncopaths in Congress are in gerrymandered districts who probably won't face consequences. Even though their fundraising was cut off, they'll just find new sources of money. They'll continue to spew nonsense. They'll talk about the Constitution as if they care about it and just gladly throw it away when they think they'll get an ounce more of power. And of course, there are people who believe that this was not only justified, but that the next step in 2024 is to have Trump win again. And then no matter what happens in the general election, if they have enough people to stop it, the official process, they will have the House of Representatives vote to be for Trump to be president. So what are we to do? How are we to stop this? For one, there is one thing Congress can do, and they can do without having much ado. And in terms of funding for the FBI, they've requested funds to go after domestic terrorism, to go after these people who, many of them are still out there in the wild. They're still out there acting like they're above the law. And they're not. They need to be hunted down and face charges for what they did. And if they die in the process, so be it. America is more important than any single insurrectionist, period. They deserve their constitutional rights and their day in court, but it's pretty clear that we all saw what happened, and it's just a matter of them admitting their guilt or a jury or judge finding them guilty. This is about the integrity of the system of constitutional order and the law. This wasn't some random protest and when they weren't there and they broke into the building. They were in the middle of the transition of power, and these people decided to break it and interrupt it and threaten people's lives. They threatened the speaker. They threatened Mike Pence, the vice president. They threatened other members of Congress. We're lucky more people didn't die. We're lucky more innocent people, staffers, office holders, people who were supposed to be there doing the right thing, didn't get hurt from an angry mob of people who wanted to hurt others, whose only motivation was anger and lies. And they thought they were better than the rules. They thought they were better than the law. And the same people who 5 years ago would tell you that they want to build a wall and support every cop broke through walls and attacked cops. And they'll still say, I am a supporter of law enforcement and I'm a supporter of the rules, even though they participated in an insurrection against our government. They tried to take your vote away. If you voted for Joe Biden, they tried to take your vote away. Even if you voted for Trump, they tried to take your vote away, because that's not how you win an election. You don't win by stealing it with less votes. Everybody who did the right thing and voted was a threat from these people. And it wasn't a plane that flew into the building or attempted to fly into the building. It was our own countrymen. It was people who they didn't expect to try to run and break through the lines and attack people because they're pro-law enforcement. Well, it turns out they were never pro-law enforcement. They were never pro-law. They were only pro-Trump. And Trump wanted an insurrection, and his people gave it to him. Whether or not Trump will face accountability in the future, or the other people who helped foster it will face accountability, that's for the future. But for now, we need to give the FBI and the Justice Department as much money as they need, as many prosecutors as they need, as many agents as they need, and as much time as needed to track down every single person they can who was in that building on that day, whether it's 800, 900, 1,000, or 2,000, and they all need to face justice. They are not deserving of sympathy. Don't feel bad for them. Don't feel bad when their families cry and say they miss their loved ones because they've been arrested. Their loved ones tried to overthrow the government. And you could say it was a shitty attempt at overthrowing the government, and the government just started its business up 6 hours later. That's not the point. The point is that it happened. That's like saying the American government opened up after 9/11. Of course it's going to open up. That's what we do. We conquer our challenges, and we continue moving forward, even when people use violence to try to stop it. And I know, I'm not a radio talk show host. I don't have a right-wing audience who I have to please. And I'm sure all these other people know for a fact that if they talked the way I did, they would get fired. They would lose their job because their audience doesn't want to hear about how people that look like them and think like them participate in a violent insurrection. They want to hear about how Joe Biden is ruining America, which is not. And that's the thing, is that the vast majority of the public is so much happier and so much more approving of Biden's presidency. And yet these people still talk like because Trump is no longer in office, the world has fallen apart. Despite that very man would let the world fall apart if he thought it would benefit him in any way, shape, or form. It's this vicious cycle of Donald Trump wanting attention and his fans wanting the validation and the people in between giving it to him no matter how wrong, ill-informed, bad, or whatever consequences come from it. And they could all say, we didn't want an insurrection. We didn't want a violent storm in the Capitol. But you talked about the fact that Joe Biden may have stolen the election for months. You gave far more credence to Trump than he was worth. And you gave all these people reason to believe that there was some fishy stuff going on, and they thought they just had to go investigate. It's the Pizzagate guy, but on a scale of hundreds. It's a bunch of people who were told something wrong, were never corrected, wanted to live their own fantasy, and went out, and now they're dealing with the consequences. I know Joe Biden isn't a vindictive person, and I'm sure he's not going to use the Justice Department for vendettas. But this isn't a vendetta. This isn't revenge. This is justice. This is accountability for people who believe that they can break laws, they can commit insurrection, and just walk away like it never happened. That the former president or politicians or other people can say it wasn't that bad. what you did wasn't that bad. No, if you were there, what you did was bad. And you should turn yourself in before someone finds you. Because if you were there, you're on camera. And if you revealed your face at any point, you're there. And I'm sure lots of people maybe took steps to try to hide, but plenty of people decided that they did not care, that they were going to show their face, post it on social media and say, look at me, I'm in the middle of an insurrection. Isn't it funny? Well, guess what? It's not funny. It's not funny anymore, folks. Charges are coming. The largest mass criminal prosecution in U.S. history is currently happening in front of us from domestic terrorists who wanted to overthrow the government. This should be the most important story every single night. Aside from the pandemic, which is still happening, and enough of these people still don't believe in the vaccines to end it so the rest of us can get on with our lives, the insurrection of our government is not, as Dan Proft said, just a desecration. And it wasn't silly for George Will to tell the public to think of it in terms of 9/11. That's exactly how you should think of it. Was it foreign nationals flying planes into buildings? No. It was American citizens charging head first into the Capitol building to overthrow an election. We're lucky the death toll wasn't higher. We're lucky more people did get hurt, even though a lot of people got hurt and 5 people are dead, including police officers, whom apparently these same people who tell me that every time a police officer dies, a little part of them dies inside, don't give a fuck about other officers who are dead now as a result of it, because they care more about insurrectionists and the money they give and their clicks and their likes and their appearance and from Donald Trump. They care about the lives of people who are trying to defend the rule of law. It was bullshit when people attacked them for the riots in 2020, and it's even more bullshit in 2021 when they say that the cops there were participating or had it coming. Fuck these people. I'm so fucking mad all the fucking time because I know these people are out there and I know they're just walking around acting like they didn't do anything wrong and that somebody's going to cater to them, and apparently my own political party as a majority thinks they didn't do anything wrong either. I know you say just go to the Democrats. Well, I can't do that here. I'm not going to be part of the Illinois Democrats and all that shit. So I have to fight. I have to fight them. I have to fight people in my own party. I have to fight insurrectionists. I have to fight Donald Trump. We talk about the fight. The fight is trying to keep the constitutional order going. It's not to overthrow it and commit insurrection because you think that Christians have it too rough in America, which they fucking don't. You think your way of life is over, which it's fucking not, or your religious beliefs are on the decline. That sounds like a personal problem. Sounds like the majority of America is heading in a different direction and you can't handle it. And you thought the only way to do that was to violently overthrow your government because that's what mattered. Unless any person talking about the insurrection thoroughly discredits Donald Trump for causing it, for the enablers that let it happen, for the Stop the Steal people, and for the insurrectionists themselves, if anyone tries to give them any credibility at all, they are complicit in trying to overthrow our government. It's as simple as that. They deserve no pity. They deserve no quarter. They only deserve accountability for their actions and the protections of the law that are provided to all criminal defendants. That's the only thing that they get. I know it's a lot of me yelling, but I'm mad. And I'm not going to pretend like there's a happy ending here. Is that there's hundreds of people still out there who think that they can just overthrow the government and walk away. They can't. They shouldn't. If you find these people, report it to the FBI. Make them face accountability. Hell, if they admit it in public, challenge them in public. Record their faces. Find out who they are. These people deserve no sympathy. They deserve no mercy. They deserve no anything from you. If you're a law-abiding person, they deserve to be in jail. They deserve to face charges. And whether or not they're found guilty or not, which a lot of them will be, because we all saw them do it on video, then they can maybe atone for their crimes. If they have atoned for their crimes, great. Make others atone. Stop supporting Trump. Stop supporting a man who doesn't care about the constitutional order. And fight for what's right. Fight for the rule of law, fight for police, and fight for America.
Bye.